Please be seated. I'll begin with a disclaimer. I'm not Rabbi David Finkelstein. But I am a dear friend of the Teplow family who I have known for at least 2 decades and am honored to be here today. I'll begin with a teaching that reminds all of us of one of Ted's favorite passions, sailing his wooden boat, which he so appropriately named Safety Valve. This is a teaching from Kohelet Rabbah. In a harbor, 2 ships sailed, one setting forth on a voyage, the other coming home to port. Everyone cheered the ship going out, but the ship sailing in was scarcely noted. Seeing this, a wise person said, "Do not rejoice over a ship setting out to sea, for you cannot know what terrible storms it may encounter and what fearful danger it may have to endure. Rather, rejoice over the ship that has safely reached port and brings its passengers home in peace." Ted is home in peace. Ted was a giant of a person. In his professional life, he spent over 5 decades at Crosby, Valve & Gage, working alongside his cousin Hugh. Together, they made sure that not only the company succeeded, but that every employee benefited from its success. This business ethic was way before its time and reflected the moral compass that Ted and Hugh believed in. Ted was a giant of a person. He was a tzaddik, a righteous person who lived his life with goodness, kindness, and caring. As a tzaddik, he gave so much of himself, wisdom, financial support to the causes and organizations he believed in, especially those connected to Israel, the Jewish community, Weizmann Institute of Science, Hebrew College, CJP, and then to other passions, of course, his alma mater, the United States Merchant Marine Academy. Ted was a giant of a person whose love for his family was central and literally the most important thing in the world. He and Charlotte created the most loving of clans, and you are their greatest legacy and their greatest contribution to this world. I imagine them sitting back on a beautiful bench in the yard of their Cape home, sitting back and looking at all of you with big smiles and deep love in their hearts. Ted is a giant of a person. Today we have the awesome task of remembering the fullness of his life and doing what he loved to do, sharing stories, and then maybe a few more stories, and some he may have told a few more times than others, but mostly celebrating his goodness. His clan. He was the beloved husband and soulmate of the late Charlotte, whom he shared 68 years of marriage. Loving father, Rachel, David, Evan, John, and the late Deborah. The proudest of grandfathers to Nathan, Alicia, Sophie, Lily, Sarah, Harry, Benjamin, Maya, Daniel, Luca, Tyler, and Eliza. He gratefully lived in this world to be present for the next generation. His great-grandchildren, Max and Charlotte, and one to enter this world very, very soon. He was the beloved brother of the late Yosef, and he's survived by his younger sister, Carol, who made it on a red-eye from Israel this morning. A miracle. Charlotte's family was especially close to Ted and Charlotte, especially Muriel and Mo and their wonderful family. Ted grew up with a huge and loving extended family. He was deeply influenced by his uncle, Dewey David Stone, who taught and showed him how to be a mensch in this world, especially in business and philanthropy. Ted's life reminds me of another beautiful rabbinic text found in the Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai asked his students, what is the best quality to which a person can aspire to? One rabbi said a good eye, generosity. Another said a good friend, friendliness. Rabbi Yossi said a good neighbor, goodwill. Rabbi Shimon said one who considers consequences or foresight. And Rabbi Elazar said a lev tov, a good heart. To which Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the great rabbi, responded, this is the answer, a good heart, a lev tov, for that includes everything. Tuvia Herzl ben Chava, the Avraham HaKohen. Ted, you are a lev tov, a good neshama, a heart and soul filled with love, caring, and kindness. Begin with a psalm that reflects his life. Psalm 15, Adonai mi'or b'holecha v'yeshkon b'hart v'shefa. God, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain. A person who is upright, who does justly, who speaks the truth within his heart, who does not slander others or wrong them, who gives his word and come what may, does not retract. A person who lives this way shall never be shaken and shall be remembered as extraordinary. One more teaching. Beautiful prayer. In Hebrew we say, Baruch atah Adonai hatov shemcha ulecha le'el ha'oda'ot. Blessed are you, and God, your name is good. We are grateful. And the English reading for this goes, let us treasure the time we have in this world. Let us count every moment precious. A chance to apprehend some truth, to experience beauty. Like Ted did, to relieve suffering, to love and be loved, to achieve something of lasting worth. The world is better. The world is better because you have lived in it. Ask you now to turn with me as we recite the 23rd Psalm. God is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me to lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters, and restores my soul. You lead me in right paths for your name's sake. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You have set a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. In a few moments, we are going to hear tributes, remembrances, stories from Ted's sister, sister-in-law, children and grandchildren. And as I was thinking about what they were sharing with me yesterday and knowing him, I remembered a beautiful poem by the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. And I think Ted would really appreciate this. It's mostly from children, but I think it's about a brother and a brother-in-law, and definitely about a grandfather and a great-grandfather and a dad. My father was God and didn't know it. He gave me the 10 Commandments, not in thunder and not in anger, not in fire and not in a cloud, but gently and with love. He added caresses and tender words. Would you and please. and chanted Remember and Keep with the same tune, and pleaded and wept quietly between one commandment and the next. Thou shalt not take the name of God in vain. Shall not take, not in vain. Please don't bear false witness against your neighbor. My dad hugged me tight, and he whispered in my ear, Thou shalt not steal, shall not commit adultery, shall not kill. And he laid the palms of his hand wide open on my head, as a Kohen does with the Yom Kippur blessing. Honor, love, that thy days may be long upon this earth. And the voice of my father, white as his hair, and he turned his face to me one last time, as on the day he died in my arms. And he said, I would like to add 2 more commandments. The 11th commandment, thou shalt not change. And the 12th commandment, thou shalt change. You will change. Thus spoke my father, and he turned and walked away and disappeared with love in his heart and a smile on his face. We're going to begin the remembrances with his daughter Rachel coming up.
I'm going to play with my wonderful friend and pianist, Cindy Fong, and I'm afraid we have to play off stage because there isn't room here. We're playing the Graceful Ghost Rag by William Bolcom. It was written for his father, in memory of his father, who was a sort of gentle and graceful man and a good dancer. Kind of.
very present here and listening to that beautiful music, imagining Ted and Charlotte dancing around the house, loving each other. It is an honor to call, thank you, Rachel, it's beautiful. Ted's baby sister up, Carol.
Never thought this day would come. Being Ted's little sister was a privilege beyond measure. He took care of me from day one. Let's take a trip together so everyone here can share in the kindness of your caring and the non-professional Ted. Rabbi, you were right. He was a child of a man. Even when he was a kid, he was a giant. When I was a little girl, I remember when you used to wheel me in my wicker carriage down the street to Aunt Lillian's house for apple pie and milk. Of course, you enjoyed it too, Ted. Aunt Lillian and Uncle Carl were Mom and Dad's best friends. And not being brought up in an observant Jewish home, we used to spend every Christmas Eve with them. Christmas trees, stocking on the fireplace mantle, the whole 9 yards. Christmas carols, it was wonderful, we loved it. And then we went further down the street to Aunt Helen's house, another good friend of Mom's, for more cookies and milk. I was a well-fed child, and you were a great wheeler. You would let me play with you in the backyard, with your friend and Joe, my oldest brother, with the Gilson boys, and we would play with grasshoppers. We had cardboard shoeboxes, which we lined with grass, so the grasshoppers would be comfortable. And then we would find worms, because God forbid the grasshoppers should be hungry. And then we punched holes in the cover so that they would get air. We spent so many days doing that and had so much fun. When I started to go to school, you were the one that showed me the shortcut on how to get to school, through everyone's backyard. We never touched a street. I was sick a lot with asthma when I was little and missed many days of school. It wasn't my parents who went to school to see the teachers and see what I missed. It was you. You went over the lessons with my teachers and then came home and taught me everything that I missed. You were only 4 years older than me, but so much smarter. If I got through grammar school, it was only because of you. You were so smart and thoughtful. I didn't come up to your shoelaces. For my 8th birthday, you and Joe made me a super special birthday present. You put 2 orange crates together. I don't know if anybody here remembers what an orange crate is. It's where you used to put oranges and lemons in. It was a crate with a board in the middle and lemons on one side and oranges on the other. You put 2 orange crates together, very well sanded down so that I wouldn't get any splinters. Between the crates, there was a seat and a back, and they put cushions on both the seat and the back. It also came with 2 books. One about the Yukon, so I could learn about Alaska, because life was like there, and one on democracy, well, democracy for those of you more educated than I was. I could put books on the shelves, and I had that bookcase for years. It was my happy place. When we were young kids, we all had jobs. One would set the table for dinner, one would clear the table, and one had to do the dishes. Ted took upon himself to check on everyone's thoroughness. He was nothing if not thorough. You missed that. This has to be redone. That dish doesn't go there, it goes here, the glasses go there. He never said it in an offensive way, but let us know that we had more to do before we left the kitchen, and we had to leave it properly. I think he was the head honcho for the kitchen cleanup until his move to Plymouth last June. When I got to high school, you had already left your indelible mark. All the teachers that you had looked at me and asked, "Are you Ted Teplow's sister?" Expecting the same kind of performance. Unfortunately, I never matched their expectations. But you left such an amazing impression, and you were so honest about it that I was never jealous, only proud and blessed to be your sister. I don't ever remember having an argument with you. We had our differences, but were always civil and respectful of each other's opinions. We disagreed, but were never disagreeable. You and Charlotte met at my 16th birthday party. It's rare when your sister gets to pick her sister-in-law. I did that with Joe too. What a run. Joe should rest in peace. We were married 9 months apart, you and I. We weren't just brother and sister. We were close friends and spent lots of times together, just enjoying each other's company. You were the consummate gentleman, always respectful. It made no difference your station in life, whether you were the janitor or the president of a country. Whoever was in your presence got your full and undivided attention. You made everyone feel as though they were the only ones who mattered. Your kindness and thoughtfulness was unexcelled. Every Caterpillar sweater I have in my closet was a gift from you and Charlotte. When I was living in the States, you called me every Friday without fail to wish me a Shabbat Shalom and inquire how everything was and made sure everything was okay. Before I made Aliyah to Israel, I had 2 cataract surgeries, and you and Charlotte took me to the doctor and insisted that I stay with you until I was completely healed. When Yudi, my first husband, died very suddenly, you were there with total and unmatchable support. Without you, I wouldn't have survived. When Sidney, my second husband, died, you were equally supportive. Everyone leaves stuff, some sort of lover, but stuff is stuff. You leave huge footprints, Ted. You weren't happy about my moving away when I married Sidney, but whenever we came to Boston, you were the most gracious host and the most respectful, loving brother. Even though we were on opposite sides of the spectrum from Sydney in a number of areas, that wasn't your focus. I remember that you always greeted me standing at the door like a commander general, waiting to welcome me with the biggest hug, kiss, and smile. It's so good to see you. Thank you for coming. You always made me feel like royalty had just appeared. As we got older, we did have one thing in common. We were both hearing impaired. It's in the gene pool, but it never prevented us from hearing and listening to each other. You have left me memories that no one can take away. You enhanced my life in a million ways, and the lives of everyone who ever met you, or even those who never met you. You have been an uncle my children and grandchildren will remember all their lives. As Uncle Dewey was our legend, Uncle Ted is their legend. We don't have any choice on the events that occur in our lives. We do have a choice in how we react to them. I choose to react in a positive way and be very grateful and thankful every day for having had Ted in my life, for having been privileged to have been his sister. If I have done anything to hurt you or upset you, I sincerely apologize and ask forgiveness. May you rest in peace. May Hashem continue to hold your hand. I will always love you and be grateful that you were my older brother.
Words from his sister-in-law and friend, Muriel.
Yes, my sister Charlotte met Ted at Carol's 16th birthday party. There was some behind-the-scenes maneuvering by Ted's adult relatives and my parents who knew each other, and not only wanted Charlotte to meet Carol, but also to meet Ted, who would be coming to the party from the Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. She was a junior in high school, and he was a junior at Kings Point. Sometime later, he invited Charlotte to attend a dance in a weekend at Kings Point. The invitation was followed with a detailed letter to my parents from Ted, explaining that Charlotte would be very well cared for and safe. His parents would drive her to and from Kings Point. They would be attending all events, etc., etc. And my usually rather strict parents said, okay. It was the beginning of knowing how thoughtful and caring Ted was. For the next 2 years, Charlotte and Ted stayed in touch and saw each other when Ted was in town. There's actually a picture that's up on one of the boards at that event at Kings Point. In Ted's senior year, the commanding officer called Ted to come to his office. Ted liked to tell the story that he was concerned by the call. Had he done something wrong? When he walked into the commander's office, he was told that the Merchant Marine Academy had been recently certified academically, and he, Ted, would be a good candidate for graduate school at one of the best universities. He told the commander that he wasn't interested in graduate school. He wanted to go to sea. Ted was an excellent student, first in his class at the academy, and a very likely candidate to be accepted at the graduate school of his choice. The commander took Ted over to a table that was filled with a variety of Harvard graduate school applications and said, if our students don't get accepted to graduate school, the certification is worthless. Good soldier that he was, Ted looked at the selection and picked up an application for Harvard Business School. He did go to sea for 2 years during the Korean War, and during his stay, he filed his application for Harvard. Even though he could not fulfill the requirement of a personal interview while at sea during the war, they found him a worthy candidate and accepted him. In 1951, he began his studies at Harvard Business School, and Charlotte was a sophomore at Wellesley College. Ted liked to say that he spent more time at Wellesley than he did at Harvard. They married in June of 1953, and soon after, Ted was assigned to naval duty in New Orleans for 2 years, and Charlotte took her senior year at what was then the Women's College of Tulane. They had a beautiful marriage. They had different styles that worked well together, shared values, and a lot of respect for one another. When they returned from New Orleans, they lived in Newton and raised a truly wonderful family with love, warmth, fun, and with genuine goodness. Ted had a very successful career, and as Carol said, he did well and he made sure the people he worked with did well. When my husband Mo and I announced our engagement, Ted immediately made Mo feel part of the family. And he did something so generous and thoughtful. Ted called his rabbi and asked that Mo be interviewed to be considered to be the architect for their new synagogue. Mo was working at a firm at the time, but was itching to start his own practice. He had the interview, but he did not get the commission. However, it propelled him to start his own practice. And about a year later, his 18th commission of his practice was to do a major renovation of the Teplow residence. These past few days, I wake up feeling sad about losing Ted, and then my mind becomes filled with all the many joyous occasions we have shared with him and his family, celebrating holidays, birthdays, our fabulous Hanukkah draws, visits to Ted's beloved Scraggy Neck, and his stories. He lived a wonderful life and did so much good. The sadness remains, but we are blessed to have been a part of his life. I want to end with a story that has touched my heart. Not long ago, one of my grandsons, Alec, told his parents that Uncle Ted was getting old and he wanted to spend more time with him. At Ted's 95th birthday party and at Passover and just past this summer at Ted's lovely scraggy neck home, he chose to sit aside Ted when he could be just having fun with his cousins. He would ask Ted questions about how he ran his company and what he did during the Korean War. And Ted had so many stories to tell him. Watching the two of them together from afar, they seemed so engaged with one another. When Alec learned that Ted died, he was very upset, and after a good cry, he told his parents that having a couple of his friends come over would help him feel better. They did come over, and when it was time for them to leave, he thanked them for coming and told them that if they had any losses in their families, he would be there for them. This is not only a story from a proud grandmother, it is also the realization that Ted has left us an incredibly great legacy of caring, kindness, and goodness that's been passed down from generation to generation and inspires us to be our next best selves. His memory will always be a blessing.
Now we'll hear some remembrances from that next generation, representing some of the luckiest grandkids in the world. Call Maya first.
In college, I studied under Rabbi Chava, who taught me that practice is your prayer. How you choose to live your life is your contribution to the world, so let it be a reflection of your devotion and connection to what you believe in. Zeda's practice was his prayer, and his life a holy one. A practice in togetherness. Sitting on the back porch of the Cape, shucking corn with his grandkids. Practice in presence. Sailing around Buzzards Bay on his beloved Herreshoff. Dragging our fingers through the salt water with Zeta calmly at the helm. A practice in integrity. Gathering around the flagpole, never letting the stars of our country or the tail of the rainbow fishing flag touch the earth before raising them up to the sky. A practice in peace. Sitting in the sunny window of their library in Cambridge, reading the Times, doing nothing but sharing space with the ones he loves. Practice in devotion. Proudly lighting the candles on Shabbat, leading us all in prayer. A practice in observance. Looking out at the water, watching for wooden boats to go by, and when one did, quietly announcing, "Oh, that's a beauty." A practice in love. Looking over at Grandma anywhere she was in the room with a contented smile on his face. And of course, the practice of storytelling. A gift he shared with all who would take the time to sit, to be present, and listen to his words paint a moment in time so evocatively. I never grew tired of hearing about his days at sea or his and Grandma's love story. His stories have kept those moments alive, and people too. I have memories of my mom so clear in my mind that I never lived through myself, but are just as real to me as my own. Zeda's stories and the practice of storytelling that he's passed down to his kids and grandkids have kept my mom's memory alive. His stories are the colored threads in the weaving of her life, illuminating who she was to me and my siblings in ways that are just as meaningful as the moments I shared with her myself. What a blessing it is to be raised on Zeda's stories, and what a blessing it is to continue in his practice. May we all continue sharing stories, care, and laughter with the people we love. This will always be Zeda's prayer. Amen.
Ooh, those great grandkids are gonna listen to a lot of stories. Maya and Sarah.
Hey everyone. There's clearly a lot to say about Zeta, and I'll leave most of it to the others. But what I wanted to share today is how Grandma and Zeta have always made me feel so at home. I think there's a lot of people in this room who would say that the Cave House feels like their home, family and friends alike. Speaking to Grandma Zeta's special ability to cultivate spaces that welcome people. I've especially appreciated this attribute since my parents and I all moved to the West Coast. Once my dad left Boston, Grandma and Zeta's Cambridge apartment became my home base on the East Coast. Staying with them on my trips back home has been a gift, allowing me to spend time and connect with them in new ways. The month I spent living with them, the summer before Grandma died, is a time I particularly treasure. In addition to our regular dinners and museum excursions that were so thoughtfully planned, this time allowed me to sit and read the newspaper over coffee with them in the library in the mornings and watch the evening news with them before bed. Each morning I did the New York Times spelling bee and word search with Grandma while Zeta slept. And then once he woke up, he joined us at the table, carrying his morning stomach in on a tray with his glass of orange juice and coffee. Immediately asked for the New York Times, opened to the obituaries page. I'd asked how he slept, and he'd say, "I wish I did everything as well as I slept." In this time, I got to learn just how many Werthers Zeta really eats in a day. And I found the stash of Chips Ahoy that tied him over from breakfast to dinner. I so easily slipped into their daily routines and traditions and always looked forward to the comfort I'd feel when I stepped into their home. A lot changed after Grandma died, but Zeta's steadfast, caring presence continued to make the Cambridge apartment feel like home. I hold the special moments we've shared these past few years where he made me giggle or surprised me with an insightful comment near and dear to my heart. The last thing I wanted to share is my final conversation with Zeta. I fortuitously FaceTimed with him a few hours before he died. Shout out to Wendy for the tech help. Bluetoothing me right into his hearing aids so he could hear me better than he has in years. He was so present in the conversation, probably because he could actually hear me. But in all seriousness, the conversation gave me a lot of solace in his death, and I hope it made you the same for you. He was in really high spirits, grinning over the phone, photogenic as ever. He was in the hospital, but feeling well, and told me the details of the plan for David to pick him up from the hospital and bring him back to Laurelwood the next day. I asked him how he likes Laurelwood, and he told me he likes it there, specifically noting the good food, the kind people, the nice space, the proximity to David and Wendy. And at times, I think the past few years, it's been hard to tell what Zeta's really thinking or wants, and we all just want the best for him. And it made me really happy to see him so genuinely content. We closed our conversation by sharing our mutual excitement for our upcoming visit over Thanksgiving. And while I wish I could see him on this trip, I'm very happy to be here celebrating his long, fulfilling life with so many people that love him.
Lily and Alicia.
In the Teplow family, it's common to celebrate or commemorate special moments with a poem. So when Zeta turned 90 years old, we wrote him a poem. And today we thought we'd share a reworking of that same poem we wrote to him 6 years ago. We're here to celebrate the life of Theodore, who lived until 96 and a half years old. He lived a life that was memorable and full, one that had many proud stories to be told. As we're surrounded by loved ones and kin, reflecting on memories of cherished time, let us start where all his good stories begin. You know, my mother was one of 9. Sweet-toothed Teddy, you'd find him by the buffet. He finished every meal as if going on a stray. But before it's over, he'll remind you and say, I never saw a dessert I didn't like.
The safety valve was one of his favorite toys that was docked out by the buoy. But if you really wanted him to make some noise, you just have to ask him about Dewey. His Tedisms were things that we all sought, with one-liners that were memorable and endearing. And from my mouth to God's ears, they won't be forgot. But as we all know, she's hard of hearing. Today, we come together to celebrate our family's creator, a man who'd always greet you with a warm shalom. A brother, a father, our beloved Zeta. Now it's our turn to wish you a safe home.
And Nathan.
Well, thank you everyone for being here to celebrate the life of my Zeta. I'm sure you'll hear a lot of stories today about his sense of loyalty and generosity and devotion. But to us grandchildren, I would describe Zeta as just such a present, loving, steady, and warm figure throughout our lives. He always greeted us with a big smile. He was always gentle and supportive in all that we did. And he hardly ever complained. And when I think of Zeta, I'll always think of the Cape, of raising flags with all the cousins together, of sailing trips around Bassett's Island. I'll think of his stories about his family and all his life adventures. And of course, I will never be able to leave the Cape House without picturing him standing at his post and wishing us a safe home as he waves his hat. But I think the memories I'll hold dearest are from my trip to Israel with him and my dad back in 2013. And in that time, I got to visit our family there and see the Weitzman Institute. And we had all grown up hearing stories about Weitzman and Uncle Dewey. And, I won't lie, I think those stories, you start to take them for granted a little bit, just because you hear them from such a young age and you hear them over and over and over again. But I remember during that trip, we spent Shabbat with our family in Jerusalem at Eden David's house. And everyone there was so excited to have Uncle Ted there visiting and to hear all of the stories. And there were a number of new husbands and family members at that time who hadn't met him yet. So all of these stories were new to them. And we sat down for our meal, and it just felt like everyone kind of centered around Zeta, eagerly awaiting these stories that he was going to tell. And that day, Zeta took it from the very top. I'm talking about the Basel Convention of 1897, literally the first Zionist Congress was where he started. But we must have sat there for hours just listening to his stories. And I remember looking around the table and just seeing everyone's faces and just how engaged they were, how intently they were listening, and the follow-up questions they had for him. And it wasn't just the stories that he was telling in the past, but they were asking him these key questions about like the future of Israel and how they could protect it and keep its legacies alive. And I think just seeing the impact that these stories had on them all, they changed my perspective. And I feel that through that experience, his stories and the state of Israel, even and our family's connection, it just took on new meaning for me. Now, during that trip, we also got to visit the Weitzman Institute, which obviously was co-founded by his Uncle Dewey, and something that was very special to Zeta and that he was involved in for decades and decades. And again, it was one of those things we had learned about and heard about growing up, but just to go there in person and see the relationships that he had built, just how fondly people thought of him, and just the impact that he made there, it gave me a new appreciation for Zeta and all that he gave to others. And I remember we were sitting at lunch after one of the sessions we were at, and I was sitting next to him. And he just leaned over to me and he told me just how delighted he was to have me there and to see the Institute in person. And I feel like in my adult life, and as Zeta got older, you didn't get too many chances to really hear how he was feeling, like in a moment. And I'll always remember that and treasure that little moment with him and knowing what that trip meant to him. So I'll close with a story and a learning about Zeta that came maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So for his birthday, Grandma had all of his grandchildren individually interview him, just as a way to learn more about Zeta and his life. And she cleverly named these TED Talks, which I thought was nice. So for my TED Talk, I knew the impact that his Uncle Dewey had on his life, and because I'm named after Dewey, I felt I had to focus my interview on it. And I went through my questions about Dewey and Weitzman, thinking I would learn, more about Dewey and his legacy. And what ended up happening is I ended up learning a lot more about Zeta. So after going through these questions, it kind of occurred to me, I knew Dewey had 17 nieces and nephews, including Zeta, and all of whom he was very, very generous and gracious and devoted to. And I asked Zeta, did any other nieces or nephews really get involved with Weitzman the way that you did? And he said no. And I asked him why he was so passionate about it, why he was so committed to it. And he said, quote unquote, I felt a duty to keep his name and his memory alive. And that always stuck with me because I just think it says so much about who Zeta was as a person. He just had this innate sense of duty and responsibility, and he never took anything for granted. He recognized Dewey's generosity and his impact, and that of others in his life too. It wasn't only Dewey. But he really took it upon himself to carry their legacies forward, and doing so through his stories, but I think more importantly through his actions and his love and his generosity. So I hope that we can all carry Zeta's legacy forward, and doing so through telling his stories and by living through many of the wonderful virtues that he possessed. We love you, Zeta. We will cherish your memory forever.
It is extraordinary to me that every person had this unique relationship with their grandfather, to every grandchild. The generation of his children beginning with Wendy.
Theodore Herzl. Wait, I need these, sorry. Also known as Ted, Teddy, Dad, Uncle Ted, Steady Teddy, and lovingly Zeta. He was an officer and a gentleman, a patriarch and a storyteller, albeit sometimes the stories were longer than you anticipated, but it was worth it. A Zionist, a philanthropist, he cared deeply about his causes and organization, but he also cared about you. When driving him around in the car, to and fro, he would say, "How are you on gas?" Wanting to fill the tank for you, and would seem disappointed when you say you didn't need any. He was a kind, gentle, decent, and fair man, a true gentleman. We loved our Zeta and our Zeta-isms. Many of them will undoubtedly be threaded through our eulogies today, but in case you didn't know, he never met a dessert he didn't like, that he wished he did everything as well as he slept, which I'm frankly very jealous of. And at his age, he didn't buy green bananas, although he defied many a bunch. He would salute every American flag he saw, which got comical on Memorial Day when every lamppost had one. He was a lover of paper, any way he could get it. Receipts, bank statements, taxes, envelopes, and recently napkins. He couldn't get enough of them. We're still finding them rolled up in jacket pockets and side drawers. But mostly, our Zeta had a deep, deep love of family. He would regale us with stories of his youth, and one that's notable to me were the times he fondly told us about how his family would gather around the piano at Brockton. His mother playing the piano, somebody playing a fiddle, somebody was playing the accordion. And he would say they sat around the piano singing and laughing every weekend. They just wanted to be together. And he would tell that story with such passion and love, almost like he wished it could happen again. So today, it's my true belief that when he passed, there was a place waiting for him around the piano with his family, all singing and laughing together. You made it home safely, sweet Zeta. We love you.
David.
I have to start by thanking everyone here. I really do appreciate you all showing your respect for my dad, showing your love and support for me and my family. It means a lot to us. And especially to Lucilla and me, not just for being here, but for all the wonderful, loving care that you gave him for so many of the recent years we had him. So, as you've heard, my dad was a good man, and he told a lot of good stories. And I do have to share one of those stories with you all today, naturally. But unlike so many of his wonderful stories that I heard so many times, this one I heard just once. And this was probably 35 or so years ago. But I remember he told it to me on the Cape House on Scraggy Neck that he loved so much, his favorite place in the world. And those of you who've been there can picture that long, sweeping lawn that slopes down to the ocean's edge. And he told me the story one warm summer day as we were walking up that lawn from the dock, most likely after going for a sail in his beloved wooden parachute. And when we got to the top of the lawn, as we were going up the steps to the deck that looked out over the water, he wrapped up by telling me the moral of the story. And that's the part I found so interesting and rather surprising. But as I thought about it over the years, I realized it really revealed something about him, about his character, about his worldview, and what made him such a uniquely wonderful man. And that's why I want to share this story with you now. Coincidentally, this story happens to be about when his father died, so it has some relevance to me in this moment. So the story he told me that day was when his father, my Zeta, passed away. He left a very modest estate. I mean, there was not much there, barely enough to cover the bills. And after he finished sitting Shiva, and after he paid all the bills that they could find, he was contacted by a bunch of fundraisers who claimed that his father had made pledges of various amounts to the charities that they represented. Now, being a very trusting man, my dad did not dispute that his father had verbally committed to these gifts, and he agreed that he would pay them out of his own pocket. And over the years, that's just what he did. Not years, but in time, that's exactly what he did. But he smiled when he told me that the ones that nudged him the most, the ones that pursued him most aggressively, were the ones he paid last. But that was, and at the end, he wrapped up by telling this to me. He said, "That's true generosity, when you give away even more than you have." I found that interesting and a bit surprising that was the lesson he took from that experience, that his father had been truly generous. Not that he had been fiscally irresponsible, not that he had been unfair in saddling his son with debts that weren't his. He chose to see the good in what his father had done. And it wasn't just his father, or even just his family, that he looked upon so favorably. It was everybody. Anytime anyone's name came up in a conversation, he would always say, "He was a great guy," or he would tell us something good that that person had done. Even when we were talking about a mistake or a failure, my dad would be the first one to say, Well, I'm sure he had the best of intentions, or you can't let anybody else try. I never heard my dad say a bad word about anyone. He gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. And he chose to look at the bright side of everything and to see the best qualities of everyone. He even saw the good in a rainy day because it made everything so lush. My dad saw the good in every one of the people he worked with at Crosby, Valve and Gage, where he spent his entire career. And that's why he and his business partner and cousin, Hugh Stone, created an employee stock ownership program, which was one of the first and one of the largest in Massachusetts, which gave majority ownership of Crosby to everyone who worked there. And he was delighted and extremely proud when everyone received significant payouts, money that would make a real positive difference in their lives when Crosby was eventually acquired. My dad was also a very religious man. I know that from sitting next to him in synagogue countless times, and more so from sitting next to him in Torah study class for over 20 years. That was a tradition we started in 1992 when each of us independently signed up for the first early morning Torah study that Hebrew College offered in downtown Boston. And every semester we would sign up for a class that typically met from 7:30 to 8:45, and then we'd go to breakfast together someplace nearby. And in those Torah study classes, many of which were taught by Rabbi Paul, and I'm grateful is here today, one of our very favorite rabbis. In those Torah study sessions, we learned that God is not just a powerful force to be feared or worshipped, but more so, God is a powerful example that we should strive to exemplify and to emulate. And also that God is that small, still voice in each one of us that we should strive to hear, to amplify, and to express as we ourselves become creators and providers and protectors. And one of the very first things we learn about God in the first book, first chapter of the first book of the Bible, Genesis 1, as God creates the world, with every act of creation, God then sees the good in what was created. God creates light, and God sees that the light was good. God creates dry land, he sees that it was good. And it's the same for the vegetation, it's the same for the sun, the moon, the stars, on and on, for the fish, for the birds, for the animals. 7 times in Genesis 1, we read, Vayar Elohim ki tov, and God saw that it was good. Interestingly, after man and woman are created, God does not stop to see the good in this final act of creation. It's interesting. Why is that? I mean, what are we, chopped liver? I think it's because, unlike everything else that had been created, God gave us the ability to see the good in one another. And he left that for us to do. God left that for us to do. That's our responsibility. My dad understood that. My dad did that. Having quoted the Bible, the most widely read book in the world, I want to end by quoting the most widely watched movie in the world, The Wizard of Oz. And my favorite line from that movie is when the wizard gives the Tin Man a heart and tells him one's heart is not measured by how much you love, but by how much you are loved by others. Likewise, my dad was a good man, not because of the good we saw in him, but because of the good he saw in others. May our memories of him inspire us to see good and to do good. Zichrono Livracha.
and Evan.
Forgive us if there's some repetition here, but my dad told some great stories, and so he deserves other people to tell some good stories about him. So, first of all, like David said, thank everybody for being here. Come from all over, from Israel, from all over the United States, to be with us. I don't know how many people are out there on Zoom also joining us, and it's just, it doesn't surprise me. Especially, my dad outlived like 98% of his own generation. Usually, funerals in that generation, there's not that many people, because they're old. And there's so many people here, and I'm sure there's a lot of people on Zoom. And all that is, that's just a tribute to my dad, a reflection of him. He taught us a lot of things, like everyone said here. One of them was how to show up. I don't know if he did that. He modeled that to a T, and that's reflected here. So I thank you guys for showing up. As a father, he showed up. He was very formative in all of us, as you can maybe hear what we're saying, and he was formative in his grandkids' lives, many more lives too. He and my mom, they went to all kinds of events with us, school events, musical events. Some were sporting events, but most all of our events. But even they stepped out of their comfort zone too. I'll tell you just a short story. I went into the Peace Corps in Guatemala, and that wasn't really their typical vacation. They did like to travel, but it was a little outside their comfort zone. We were riding jeeps, and we were hiking through mountains and streams to see the work that I was doing there. They took some great vacations. Like usually they went to like New York City and Paris. It wasn't what they were used to, but it just didn't stop either of them. There wasn't one complaint from my dad or my mom. My mom might have heard this a little bit more. But the point is, they showed up. It was really important for them to understand us and be there. And like so many people here, he showed up in your lives. Of course, he showed up for the Weichmann Institute of Science, same for Hebrew College, and in many other organizations. And forgive me, I'm usually not that long-winded, and I didn't know what I was going to say, but I was surprised at how much I had to cut this down because I had a lot to say about my dad. He told a good story. He was a man of many words, but also he was a man of very few words, as I'll mention later. He told a lot of stories about Dewey Stone and the 9 Stone siblings, the 7th of whom was his mom, his mother Evelyn, and I was named after her. She died just before I was born. He took such pride in his family, and he also made sure that we do too, and we do. I'll take a lot of pride. There's so many more stories of the Merchant Marines, the Korean War. He referred to that as my war. Many of you know some of these stories, and hopefully they'll be indelible in our memories as we think of them. I also wanted to talk about, he was a man of few words in really significant and important ways. When he did speak in making big decisions at work, or other committees he was on, and with his family, we were serious. His words were carefully spoken, they were respected, they were concise, and they're always really well thought out. And I imagine this was one of the main qualities which helped him become so successful in his professional life. Another amazing quality having to do with few words from my dad, as my brother alluded to, was he was admirably non-judgmental. He didn't judge people when other people did judge him. That's why everybody just felt this kindness and acceptance, even if they sometimes felt judged by other people. Another aspect of my dad on the few word side of things were about his own emotions. They were hard for him to express in words. But despite this is a complicated quality, but we could all feel his love in a very big and often unspoken way. One of the ways he showed love was by providing, and so many of us in this room were fortunate to be on the receiving side of that. I think if I asked everybody here who knew him if they were ever able to pay for a lunch or a meal with Teplow, and I think there would be few, maybe zero hands raised. As gentle a man as he was when it came to pulling out his credit card to pay for a group meal, he was quite fierce. Maybe that's as aggressive as Teplow could get. My dad, he also taught us how to work hard, and he modeled for us how to work hard. And I can't thank him enough for that. He worked hard, he kept his ego in check, and he was quite humble. When he went to work, first thing he did was he went down to the ground floor of the factory. I think there were something like 500 employees. He knew everybody's name, he knew everybody's birthday, and he didn't miss a birthday. As you know, he worked for Crosby, Valves and Gages in Rentham. And I just thought that was such a great quality of humility. He went down to the ground floor before he went up to the third floor where his office was. And he was successful. He worked long and hard hours. He only really took 2 short vacation weeks a year, even though he had 4 vacation weeks, but 2 of them were given to the military, doing his naval reserve duties. He was incredibly passionate and proud of being a naval officer. And it was interesting in his later life how fiercely he held on to that. And it was almost his primary identity in his later years. As we've heard, every American flag he gave this crisp salute. And till the day he died, he would do that. He never spent a day in his later years without this Korean War veteran hat. He had the scrambled eggs logo on the rim. It was his rank identifier. So mixed in with a great and a full life, there's losses too. We lost my sister Debbie way too young, and there is no getting over that. Just we got through it. He lost his mother at a relatively early age, and he lost his wife, our mother, 3.5 years ago. So the loss right now is so mixed with gratitude for what we have. And I'm filled with gratitude to have my siblings, to go through this together, my brother-in-law, Jim, my sister-in-law, Maureen. So it just makes it easier. It helped them in their later years have a graceful final chapter of their lives. But really, we just owe a huge amount of gratitude, a big thank you to them for teaching us how to be a family. A tight-knit family through thick and through thin. The other thing, as Dave mentioned, statistically, people who've been married for 70 years, very few of them live more than 2 years beyond that. Most of them got 6 months or a year. He lived 3.5 years after my mom died. He never would have lived those years without two very special people, Lucille and Anami. And we thank you. Lucille has been with my parents for 45 years. And so then the day before she died, Mom had a more drawn out final couple months. Lucille said to my mom when she was dying, and I quote, "Don't worry, Mrs. Teplow." She never called. She called my mom Mrs. Teplow, and she called my dad Mr. Teplow for 5 years. "Don't worry, Mrs. Teplow. I will take care of Mr. Teplow when you're gone." And she did. She showed up. Anamine also was incredibly loving and caring for both my mother and my father in the final years. And just gracias, Anamine. My father, he would teach us all a lesson in what it's like to be present, to be fully present, and enjoy moments and every moment. And I really admire him so much for that. When my son Daniel was a toddler, we were really lucky. Every Thursday, my dad did have more time. Every Thursday, Zeta would come to watch him in Andover while Susan and I went to work. He was just so content to sit on the floor, let a toddler do what a toddler does, just being there. He would picture book on his lap. Later years, he'd just sit there and play limitless hours of Lego. But the difference, there were no distractions. He was just content to be there and to focus and never multitask like we do, like our generation does. In my dad's later years, just sitting on the deck at Cape Cod, not doing anything, just watching the boats go by. This was as good as it got for him. My dad never had a cell phone. He never used email. And he lived such a full life. We need to talk a little bit about Salem. That was his most peaceful place, his happy place on Safety Valve, his classic 100% wooden boat, classic Herreshoff 12, which he donated, by the way, to the Cape Cod Maritime Museum. It's still there with the Safety Valve name on the back. He was not bothered by anything when he was sailing. Actually, he was bothered by one thing. Motorboats. We've heard today, like Teddy Teplow had no enemies and everybody adored him. But sorry, there was one enemy. The enemy was the motorboat. He lived till he was 96. He would have lived to about 106 if he didn't spend so much energy and stress screaming, "Slow down!" and other things about screaming. Even when he lived in Salem, he was sitting in his happy place on the deck at Cape Cod, seemingly just so peaceful. If one of those big cigar-type boats flew by, he'd just sit there and huff jerks. And I never really understood how a man who spent 2 years aboard a Liberty ship the size of 3 football fields, transporting cargo between Japan and Korea during the Korean War, could hate motorboats so much. He'd do anything. He'd pull these fearless sailing stunts just to prove his right of way over. Never yielding for rocks or buoys or anything. So maybe he did have a few enemies. There's many more sailing stories. Ask my Uncle Mo about the Human Rudder Nautical Adventure. That was one of the better ones. And there are quite a few more near disasters in the safety valve. So to conclude, my father was a well-loved man, and deservedly so. Nobody had anything but praise and admiration for him. He was a true gentleman, and he was a gentle man. He adored his wife. He adored his kids, and he adored his grandchildren, and now his great-grandchildren. There's nothing more important to him than to be with family. He took incredible pride to preserve the family legacy of his Uncle Dewey Stoner. And even more so than the well-deserved pride, he must have felt deep inside for himself, for all of his own accomplishments. That's the kind of man he was. Safe home with that.
I vaguely remember Ted sharing a story, and maybe I don't remember it so well, but and talking about his kids and saying, you know, John was the easiest child we ever had. You're up, buddy.
Thank you. I want to thank again everybody for showing up, and I also want to apologize for us giving the true tribute of Teddy Teplow with our long stories. So I'm going to be wrapping it up. I only have about 150 cards that I'm going to go through. Unfortunately, I asked the funeral home. They forgot the bin of smelling salts by the key box, but I don't want to get into politics at a funeral, but my parents were staunch Democrats. The other day we're having breakfast with my brother Evan, and he goes, I think I know what happened. And I thought he was, as a doctor, going to give me some insight into medically what happened to my father. And he said, I'm pretty sure when Trump got elected for the second time, Charlotte was up there saying, okay, Teddy, that's it. Come on, let's go. You're out of there. Now, the Jewish belief about heaven is complex and varies among different Jewish denominations and schools of thought, according to the famous Rabbi ChatGPT. Unlike my father, who was number one in every class he attended, I was not. As a matter of fact, I was number 18 in my Bethel Hebrew School class. And there were only 12 students. So, I am in no position to lead a Talmudic discussion about the existence of heaven. But I do think he's looking over us with Deb and my mom. And I'm positive that Charlotte is nagging him to clear the table and load the dishwasher. Judaism places greater emphasis on living a meaningful and ethical life in the present rather than what happens after death. I don't think anybody exemplified this better than my father. He was a great student. He was honest. He never really drank. He never really gambled. I think it's for the best that he's not here to meet most of my friends at the Shiva afterwards. My dad was meticulous about details. Notes on literally every piece of mail. Labels on every drawer in his toolbox. Every meeting, every appointment kept in the little 2-inch by 3-inch free Harvard Cooperative Society date book. And then even when he got older, and he had less to do, and he didn't have meetings and appointments, he retroactively filled the date book with the events of his day. September 12th, 6 o'clock, John, dinner, oi. 7:45, bathroom, 3.5 sheets of toilet paper. Teddy's systems worked. He didn't need a cell phone, an Apple Watch, or a MacBook Air. Dad had a wind-up watch, a Harvard appointment book, and a contact book held together by 2 different colored elastics. He totally skipped the computer age, even though it was like 30% of his life. It was like man versus machine, and my man won. In our world, the computer race was Apple, the Microsoft PC, and Teddy T. His systems work. He never forgot a birthday. He was always prepared for everything. He was always ready, Teddy. And this was further exemplified this summer, 96 years old. We're on the Cape, having a Saturday night dinner. That could be 18 people, that could be 20 people. His war was the Korean War. Our war was getting ready for dinner on Saturday nights on the Cape. We go through our routines, we sit my dad down, we put him in his place, we give him his meal, his diet cranberry juice, we get around the table, we sit down, and my father always has to give a bracha or a blessing over on a piece of bread. Now, for some reason, I have no idea why, but for the first time in about 3 years, there wasn't a piece of bread in the house. Now, we've been through this once before, so we're resilient. You could use a cracker, sort of in the bread family. So we give him a cracker, we turn the ceremonies over to my father, do the blessing, thinking he's gonna pick up the cracker and do the blessing. He reaches into his pocket. He pulls out a stack of about 18 napkins. Calm, cool, like nothing's going on. Unfolds it. In the 18th napkin, there was a third of a slice of bread. And like a chocolate bar, with those little grooves for the piece of chocolate, he breaks off a bracha-sized piece of bread, wraps up the 18 napkins, puts the bread remaining back in his blazer. Yes, he was wearing a blazer and a casual Saturday night dinner on the table. Rips the bracha like nothing, goes on, dives into his meal. The table is like, what? Where did that bread come from? Did his father give it to him in the Depression? Just for this? Did his grandfather give it to his father in Kiev and he sailed it over to America? Did Moses bring it down with the tablets and give it to one of our relatives just in case that there was going to be a bracha without bread and he was ready for that day? Always ready, Teddy. So like everybody said, Dad was a man of few words when it came to his emotions. But he taught us by example. He taught us how important it was to be there for family, friends, and colleagues. He always was there for so many people through celebrations and hardship. He showed us how to be hard workers and be dependable. He showed us what it meant to be loyal, be a loyal friend, a son, a brother, a spouse, and a parent. He fulfilled so many of his dreams, and none were more important than building a large, close family of his own that would always be there for each other. And I'm really proud of how we've enjoyed 1 million laughs in our lives and taken care of each other through our challenging times. He showed us how to care for your parents and preserve the dignity they deserve as they live out their final chapters. And as you were told, one of my dad's famous cake traditions was every time somebody left the house, he got up, he gave them a big hug and a kiss. Even in '96, he walked out to the lamppost, which was perilous, outside of our house, and he stood there, waving farewell with his cat until they safely turned out of our long driveway, safely onto the road. So join us in waving goodbye to our commander as he takes his last turn from his long and meaningful journey.
Now I'm remembering, Jonathan, what he said about you. My friends, it's come time where I'm going to chant a prayer called the Amalei Rachamim, where we imagine exactly what we've heard. Ted's soul being lifted into the heavens heights, reuniting with his mishpacha who are there before him. If you are able to and feel comfortable rising, please do. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen b'malomim, Hamitzei menucha nechona, Tachat k'nfei hashchina, b'malot kedushim otaharim, Kezoach harakim masihirim, Et nishmat Herzl ben Chava v'Abraham HaKohen, שהלך לעולמו, בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתו. אנא בעל רחמים הצדילהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, ותרוע בצרוע החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נלחתו וינוח בשלום, על מזגבו, ונאמר Amen. El Malei Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure. To the soul of Tuvia Herzl ben Chava of Abraham HaKohen, who's gone to his eternal home, God, we ask that Ted, our loved one, find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in all of us here in the bond of life. May he now rest in peace as we say, Amen. As he leaves the room, I think it's only appropriate for those who know it that we sing Hatikva.
For those on the live stream, we're going to be putting on pause in a moment, and we're going to go live again at the cemetery. So probably be another 20, 25 minutes, but we will be going live again. Thank you.
אלפיים, להיות חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון.